Yeah. But sometimes those country flag things, like Saint Martin is an island, and half of it is, I think, the Netherlands, and half of it is French. And so it's a state-run thing where to get from one side to the other, you can only take state-run taxis. And they know that with all the tourists coming there, so they charge you an arm and a leg for like a 5-minute taxi ride. It's like $60. Yeah. So probably not. It would be like an hour and a half walk probably. You could, but you're spending all your day walking then. Well, no, see, I made it across for $2. Well, no, I made it back. I made round trip $62. So getting there was $2. So I found this black van that just had this cardboard sign in the window, and my wife is thinking that, oh yeah, this is a kind of a third world country island thing. Maybe that's just what their taxis look like. So this guy's charged us $1 a person to go over there, and so he gets in. He's drinking some sort of malt beverage while he's driving. He picks up this vagrant a couple minutes later, and then he picks up some sort of streetwalker person, I think, and they're arguing up front in French. And then all of a sudden there's a gunshot, or windshield shatters out. So he's like scraping away the glass and still driving. He drops us off on the outskirts of the French side, and because I guess he's not allowed in town because he'll get caught not being but we got shot at, so I didn't give him a tip. It's $2. So, but she didn't want to find one of those on the way back, so we took the state taxi on the way back. Well, I mean, there was lots of other people around us we could have used as human shields. Think smarter, not harder. Put yourself first. Think smarter, not harder. Okay, so let's go over this exam. Exams were pretty decent. I put up on the slides already. This was kind of the grade breakdown. So you see there, it's across the board. Class average is right around a 70. Highest grade was 100. Lowest grade was like a 30 or something, a 32. So you look at the breakdown, 8 people with A's, 4 B's, 4 C's. So you had pretty good representation throughout. So I'm thinking the exam was probably a reasonably fair exam. Remember, if you did poorly on this exam, you can fix it by doing better on the final exam. So whatever you get on the final, if it's better than the midterm, I'll replace your midterm exam score with that. All right, so having said that, let's go through the exam. All right, so write an error-free Hello World program. So public, maybe call it public class driver, public static void main string array args. System.out.println hello world, something like that. Keeping in mind, so commonly, I mean, I would say most people got this one fine. Commonly missed things is we just put this one line. Well, that's not a program, that's just a print line. Some people just put the main method. Programs in Java need to be encased inside of a class. So if you got some subset of credit, that means that you didn't give me all the pieces, the class, the main method, and the contents. All right, questions on that one? All right, next one, new keyword. So, something along the lines of, like this is our real estate agent that requests new memory from the OS. Arrays require contiguous memory. So that's memory in a row. So asking the OS for a chunk of memory is exactly what an array needs. Something along those lines. So basically saying, what does the new keyword do? It gets us memory. How do arrays work? Arrays work by having contiguous memory. So they are wrapped around a chunk of memory, and they take some size step from a base address in that memory. And so the new keyword request memory, arrays use memory. So I was looking for the word contiguous memory somewhere in there. So something along those lines. Lots of reasonable, correct answers, but something in this vein. All right, questions about that one? All right. All right, so this one got a little interesting. So why is the char primitive type actually stored as an unsigned 16-bit integer? So we talked about this last semester. We also talked about at the beginning of this semester, with that difference being in C++, chars were 8 bits. So, you know, if you wanted to go into a little history stuff, I'll just throw it in here just for completeness. In C++, chars were unsigned 8-bit ints because they mapped to the ASCII character set. Now you might have put something in here like chars are actually stored as numbers that are then looked up on a predetermined table that maps between a number and a character. In Java, the mapping uses Unicode, which has more characters for their languages. So it uses a 16-bit unsigned int instead. Now the unsigned part, actually isn't all that important that it's unsigned. You have this predefined table, and the table goes from here's character 0, character 1, character 2, character 3. Nothing says that it couldn't have been character -127, character -114. That just would look weird. You know, so effectively, if you just have this table of things where you're saying, okay, I'm looking from this character to this character. So the unsigned part basically allows us to have that table be a 0 indexed map, something along those lines. Questions about that one? Okay. What is the difference between this and the super keyword? So this is how an object refers to itself from within itself. Super is how an object refers to the instance of its parent from within itself. So that basically is enough. Some folks got into the idea of inheritance and stuff, which is fine. Nothing wrong with that, but really something along the lines of this is how we talk to ourselves. Super is how we talk to our parent. Similarly, just to bounce back up for a second, dealing with the new keyword, a lot of folks dealt with kind of gave a definition based on like creating instances of objects and things like that. Now, that's not necessarily wrong. We do use the new keyword to create instances of objects. But ultimately, that comes down to the actual job of the new keyword is to go get us memory. And we need memory to store objects. We need memory to store arrays. So whatever we need to ask the operating system for some memory to store something, that's where the new keyword comes in. So it's not directly linked to this idea of creating or creating an instance or something like that. So I think several answers kind of went down that path, maybe a little bit too far. Not that it's not related to that, but that's not actually what the new keyword does. All right, write a simple object named player that keeps track of a first name, last name, and jersey number. Okay, so now this is where, and as expected, this is where programming exams start getting interesting. And you see it in our grade breakdown here. Generally speaking, these folks up in this category, they probably wrote reasonably competent code, right? Maybe you lost some points for, you took a zig when you should have zagged or something like that. You get down into this area, the code was pretty non-existent. And as we said back in 200, that's always kind of the last thing that happens. You are able to read code significantly sooner than you're able to write code. So eventually that's going to click. But hopefully this kind of gives you a feel of where you currently are. When I was grading this is a funny offshoot, but there was and I graded with the names off, but I went back and looked afterwards, but I'm not going to mention any names. But there was this one student who would have fit into the category of not being very strong at the programming stuff. And I guess what is like 4 programming questions. So like 3 of them, they essentially left blank or wrote basically nothing. And one of them, they're just using all sorts of functions that we never introduced, and it was basically, it was wrong, but not like that wrong. So probably that code came from someplace else. But I was I don't know, this is dating myself a little bit, but the movie Old School, maybe you've seen that movie? It's really funny. Will Ferrell's in it. They always threaten making a sequel, but in the movie Old School, there's this debate thing near the end where the Will Ferrell character, it's about these older guys who go back to college, and they start running a fraternity like it's like the mafia or something like that. And Will Ferrell plays this kind of this idiot character in it. He's an older guy, but just not the smartest, not the sharpest tool in the shed. So like in the end, they're trying to get him kicked off of campus, and they're having this competition that they're trying to like embarrass them. And they bring in this like professional debate speaker and stuff to go up against Will Ferrell, which looks like Will Ferrell's going to make himself out to be an idiot. So Will Ferrell, he gets up there to debate and he answers the question, and like perfectly. It was like an answer he's not capable of giving. And then when he's done, he's like, "What happened? I blacked out." So I spent 20 minutes watching that on repeat after I read that question, because it's like, well, 1 out of 4 he wrote competent, and so maybe he did one of those blackout things. I got a little entertainment. It probably boosted everybody's grade on the next question, because I was in a good mood, I guess. So the search would be Old School Will Ferrell debate scene. That's what you want to look up. All right. So in any case, try to measure your performance on the exam, maybe by those programming questions. Because I would say if you miss some of those other questions like we just covered, that probably means you're not paying great attention, or you didn't really prepare for the exam and stuff like that. But to really see where your current competency level is in programming, and my expectation is higher this semester than it would have been in 200, and it will be even higher in 300, but you should see yourself improving. The programming questions are kind of your best place to look to just see where you currently are sitting. Go ahead.
Are we able to read which one we got wrong?
You should be able to.
And when I open it, it just shows like the grade, but it doesn't show like it says we okay, but we go back to all the
All right. Let me see. Let's see. Can I do this? So I have it set up. Oh, I bet there was one person who didn't take the exam. So maybe this after attempts are graded doesn't actually show up. So can I force it? Well, let me just try this. Try that now.
Yeah, now it shows.
Okay. Sorry about that. It is weird. I mean, if nobody even, if this person didn't attempt it, it's literally waiting for that 30-second person to take the exam before it shows anybody their feedback. You can still see your score though, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I got you. Just not your feedback. Okay. Okay, where was I? All right, so any case, creating a player object. So a lot of people left like the class off this thing. So we're going to say public class player. So we're creating an object. We have our section for our fields. A couple people wrote some old C++ stuff where you had that private section and wrote your stuff underneath that. Remember in Java, we attach that to each thing. So we would have like private string first name, private string last name, private int jersey number. So we're going to keep track of 3 fields, 2 strings for their name and an int for their jersey number. If you chose a string for the jersey number, that's fine, but just mix it up a little bit. We can do it as an int. All right, then we're looking for the constructor to actually build this guy. So it's going to be public player. This guy will take in a string f name, a string l name, and an int jersey number. And we'll set this dot f name equal to f name. This dot l name equal to l name. This dot jersey number equal to jersey number. So something along those lines. So some common mistakes were like leaving the whole class part off of this. I don't think I took off, maybe I took off a point for the C++ version of this guy here. Another common mistake was like leaving the fields completely off, like they just weren't here. Not having the constructor or having the constructor, having these things kind of backwards in here where you would say like f name is equal to this dot f name, or just having made up variables, maybe having this guy have nothing in it. And then when you start getting to the, those would be kind of maybe the answers that show a little bit of competence. But then when you start getting to the ones where people are like hard coding in like their name and stuff like that, or they don't even have code, they just like write their name. I think I had one answer that was just like 1, 2, 3, 4 was the answer. And the thing is, there's nothing wrong with that. I get it, that if you're not at the point where you can actually write the code yourself, because sometimes it's like, I don't know where to start. But this at least should give you that feedback that, okay, I'm not where I need to be quite yet. All right, questions about that one? All right, so this would be my appropriate constructor, and these would be the fields that I'm keeping track of for my player object. All right, hex to binary. So several people forgot the shortcut that we learned in 200. So they converted from hex first to decimal, and then from decimal to binary. Which works. That's a little bit time consuming, but it works. Remember that hexadecimal and binary are very compatible bases. Okay, so you can represent all 16 hextets using exactly 4 bits. So for this one, you would say, so this is a 2, a 10, a 4, and a 13. No, a 12, right? A, B, C, 10, 11, 12, 12. So these are actually the numbers. So an A is a 10 and a C is a 12. So this is 0, 0, 1, 0. That's a 2. So this is 1, 0, 1, 0. That's a 10. Then 0, 1, 0, 0. That's a 4. And then 1, 1, 0, 0. That's a 12. So this is your answer. Otherwise, you could have done your 2 patterns, right? The pattern where you go from 24 AC, that guy 2 decimal. That's the one where we say this is the ones place. This is the 16s place. This is the 256 place. This is what, the 4096 place. That's right. And then once you have that, then you do the divide by 2, record the remainder over and over again. So you do both patterns and you'll come out with the same number. So several people did it correctly the long way, but this would have been better probably. Questions on that one? All right, write a method named count spaces that takes a string as a parameter and returns the number of spaces contained in that string. All right, so we're going to return a number. So things I was looking for in here is knowing the difference between returning a value and printing a value, knowing how to use strings, loop through strings, things like that. So we have this count spaces, and this is taking a string S as a parameter. And our goal here is to have a counter. So we'll start off at a count of 0. We're going to loop through all the characters in our string. Okay. Now we know that getting the current character, we use the char@at method. So s.char@at I gives us the current character we're looking at. We are interested in asking a question about that character. We want to say if the character we're currently looking at is equivalent to a space. Remember, a char is single quote, single quote. It's a single character. Some people try to do like a dot equals, things like that, or create a string called space that just had a space in it. You could have done something like that. Let me just finish writing this and I'll show you a couple of things that people did. Somebody try to get in there. Oh, I thought I saw somebody in the waiting room. All right, so so if we are looking at a space, we'll say count plus plus. After this loop is done, we're going to return our count. Go through the string, ask is the current character we're looking at equal to this character, which is a space, single quote, space, single quote. If it is, increment count. If it's not, just check the next character. After we've checked every single character, count should hold the number of spaces we bumped into. Make some sense? So what some folks did in here, and this wouldn't have been right, but let me just kind of show you a couple of things. So some people wrote something like, maybe string space is equal to something like that. Okay. And then they would have asked a question, something like if s.char@at I dot equals space. So even though when I look at that, I know what you're trying to say. Right. So this isn't like a crazy deal breaker, lose all the points type thing, but we want to break this down and think about what's going on. S.char@at I, that guy is a char. Chars are primitive types. Primitive types can only hold a value. They don't have extra magic tricks like calling an equals method. Okay, they can only hold a value. So if this guy is a char, dot equals would not be in the cards. We use the double equal sign to compare chars to something. Now, in this case, I'm comparing a char to a string. Those guys are not comparable types, right? So string's an object type, a char is a primitive type. So the double equal sign is going to compare the char to the memory address of the string. And that's also not going to get you what you're looking for. Make some sense? So make sure you recognize that char@at gives us a single character from the string, and that character is a primitive type and it can't do a whole bunch of extra stuff. So we need to ask the question more plainly. All right, something along those lines. So questions about that one? Okay. Write a method called Hex Converter. So what I gathered from it, this is the one we didn't like, right? That's what it seemed like from a lot of folks. Okay, so write a method called Hex Converter that takes a char as a parameter and returns the numeric hextet equivalent. And I gave you some examples. For example, if it took in the character A, and A is equivalent to a 10, it should return a 10. If it took in the character B, a B is equivalent to an 11. If it took in an F, it's going to return a 15. If it took in the char 4, it's going to return in the number 4. Okay, that's the problem we're solving. All right, converting a char, which is a representation of a hextet, to its int equivalent. Make sense? So this guy is going to return an int. It's called a hex converter. It's going to take a char as a parameter. Now, what some people did is they wrote just a zillion if statements, right? Okay, if it's a 0, return. If it's the char 0, so that's another important thing related to what we had before. So if C is equal to the char 0, then return the int 0. Understand the difference between these two. This is the character that is 0. This is the integer that is 0. We are taking a char in here. If you say, is C equal 0, like that, that's asking if the primitive type C, which holds an int, from an earlier question, right? Chars hold unsigned 16-bit integers. Is that int equal to 0? Well, that's not what you're interested in. It's going to hold a Unicode value, right? Now, there is a such thing as the Unicode 0, whatever the first thing in Unicode is. So if this could return a true, potentially, depending on what you passed it. Then you're going to return 0, but it's not going to give you the output you were looking for. All right. So you're really asking, is the character that I got equal to one of the characters I was expecting? We're comparing it to a character. So make sure you put single quotes around it. If it is, I'll go ahead and do the conversion and say, here is the number 0 that you want. All right. What some people did is they returned C here. Or some people tried to do like a shorthand thing where they, maybe wrote something along the lines of, something like that, like, hey, if it's any one of the 0 through 9 thingies, not great, but I mean, I got what you were trying to say, right? If it's any one of those guys, if you say return C, what are you actually returning? You're returning an int, so you're going to return the Unicode value of whatever C was. So that's going to be the Unicode value of 0, which is not 0. The Unicode value of 1, the Unicode value of 2, so on and so forth. It'll give you an int, but not the int you were looking for. All right, makes some sense? So you could certainly do a bunch of if statements, like else if C is equivalent to A. I'm going to do it differently anyways. So return 10, that kind of stuff. Just put a zillion if statements in there and it gets the job done. No problem. Now, I did mention that it might be handy for you to be familiar with index of as well as char at. That'll do it. So we have a string containing, at bucket 0, we have a 0. At bucket 1, we have a 1. At bucket 2, we have a 2. At bucket 10, we have an A. So if I say, what is the index of A in this string? It's going to give me a 10. And if it made you feel better, you could have said something like string map is equal to this thing. And then just return map dot index of C. Because index of returns the first occurrence the position of the first occurrence of a char in a string. So the first occurrence of the char 0 is at bucket 0. The first occurrence of the char 6 is at bucket 6. The first occurrence of the char F is at bucket 15. Now, this does assume that you were passing in uppercase characters, and it assumes that you only gave it a legal character, so some folks did do something like, character dot to uppercase C, something like that, and that would guarantee that your character was in uppercase, but relatively unimportant from a logic perspective. All right, questions about that one? Well, but the thing is, that's the point. It's supposed to, there's nothing wrong with the wall of if statements. You've heard me say many, many times, I'd rather have a correct, inefficient answer than an incorrect, like trying to look smart, doing some shortcut thing answer, right? Okay. So while this might like, okay, well, that was nice and short and sweet. Well, you still, in a test condition, still had to come up with that, right? Crunch time, you're on question 8, maybe you're watching the countdown, like, okay, I'm just gonna copy and paste a whole bunch of if statements. I'm done. I'm just gonna do this. There's nothing wrong with that. So don't chase short, simple solutions like this necessarily. Hopefully through practice, those things start becoming go-to moves. I think when I introduced strings, we kind of had a slide with like, here's some of the go-to methods for strings that would be helpful for you to kind of have in like a quick slot holster. And char add and index of are index of is a really good method that you can use for a lot of things that it does. You immediately assume, oh, it's just a search for a char method, but you can use it for all sorts of stuff. Like this is a pretty good use for that. Okay. How can you tell the difference between a class method and an instance method at the time of their definition? How do you call a class method when you use it in your program? How do you call an instance method when you use it in your program? Okay, so first of all, we definitely reiterated this over and over and over and over and over and over again in class, right? Like a lot. The number of people that gave completely ridiculous answers to this one was too many. Plenty of people got it right just fine. But this is a really important concept that unlocks the entire Java documentation to you. All right, so how do you tell the difference between a class method and an instance method at the time of their definition? Class methods have the static keyword before their definition, while instance methods do not. So the existence of that static keyword tells you whether this is a class method or an instance method. So all you have to do is peek and say, does it say static? If it says static, that tells me exactly how I have to call it. If it doesn't say static, then I know I have to call it the other way. We call class methods using the name of the class in which the method was defined. We call instance methods using an instance of the class in which the method was defined. So class methods, we just use the class name, dot whatever the method is. Instance methods, we first need to create a variable of that type, of that class type, create an instance of that class, and then we use that instance to call the method. All right, make some sense? All right, super important concept. The number of people that missed this one was a bad one. Not a whole lot of excuse to miss this one. Programming ones I get. I mean, this was a softball. It just was reiterated so many times in the slide, probably multiple times, set in class. And when we reviewed for the exam, I said it will be on there. Yeah, so that brought me off of my Will Ferrell debate high, right? I was riding there. All right, last one. Write a method called count trucks that takes an array list of automobiles as a parameter, where an automobile is the parent class of both car and truck. Your method should return the number of trucks in the array list. So this guy's going to return an int because it's going to return the number of trucks. It's going to be called count trucks. It's going to take an array list of automobiles. Call this the list as a parameter. We're going to have a counter, starts off at 0. We're going to loop through every element in the list. Okay, and the length of an array list is size, but if you said dot length, that's fine. Because like I said, I'm assuming you didn't test this stuff, so as long as you showed me competence, that's okay. I++. So the real kicker here was, how do we ask, is a particular thing we're looking at, is this particular automobile, is it a truck? If the list dot get bucket I, that is the automobile that lives at bucket I. If that guy is an instance of truck, that's our instance of operator. Count ++. Return count. Make sense? So some folks tried to go and like reinvent, you know, they wrote their own automobile class, their own car class, their own truck class, and then they put their own differentiator in there that you know, which was a whole lot of extra work to just bypass having to use instance of. But really this question was about knowing that instance of is a Boolean operator that allows you to check to see if a particular object is one of these kinds of objects. All right, make some sense? That's all the questions. So questions about any of those things. So I will submit my exam. How long did it take me? Does it tell me how long it takes me afterwards? Ha ha! Nailed it.
Yeah, but you know, it's late though, so like realistically.
Man, you're right. You're right. Plus, there was a lot of babble I added.
Yeah. Also, you definitely talking to other people.
Yeah, there was like a dishonesty. Yeah, you're right. You're right. If I'm gonna make rules, I should follow them myself. This is kind of the deal. Okay. So I understand several of you have a pretty intimidating test coming up in 325. So good luck with it. I just so you're aware, Blade sent me the exam ahead of time. I wanted to make sure that you know, this isn't too hard, too long, stuff like that. So he is very, you know, concerned that he wants to make sure the class is fair for people. And I know sometimes he has kind of a dry sense of humor, and with a little bit of a language barrier that could sometimes come off as something else. So I think he is frustrated that he's maybe not explaining concepts as well as he wants to be able to. So do the best you can in the exam. I know I'm working with him to try to see if, well, you know, he can explain things a little bit clearer or set expectations better, that kind of stuff. But in any case, so do the best you can in the exam, but just understand that he's coming at it from the perspective of he wants you to do well. Okay, he's not trying to just punish you in class.